as we celebrate a remarkable milestone in the history of rural America and the electric co-op movement. Tonight we honored the 90th anniversary of the Rural America Act, REA, signed into law on May 20th, 1936, as one of the most informative initiatives of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal. The REA helped bring electricity to rural communities across the nation and forever changed the quality of life for millions of Americans. When the REA was enacted, only about 10% of American farmers and rural homes had electricity service. Today, nearly 99% do, a testament to the vision, determination, and cooperative spirit that powered progress across rural America. There is no better place to celebrate this legacy than here in St. Genevieve County, where Citizens Electric Corporation's story began, and where the mission of serving rural communities continues today. We are honored this evening to welcome our guest speaker, Jim McCarty. Jim is the editor emeritus of Rural Missouri Magazine and a recognized authority on electric co-op history. A graduate of East Central College and the University of Missouri with a degree in photojournalism. Jim served as editor of Rural Missouri for more than 40 years. He is the author of 15 books on electric co-op history and was inducted into the Missouri Photojournalism Hall of Fame in 2017. Often referred to as a Missouri electric co-op historian and known by many as the dedicated coffee connoisseur, Jim brings a wealth of knowledge and storytelling to this important chapter of our shared history. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Jim McCarty, who's going to try to sell you on joining the REA. Jim.
Sir, I hear you're in the dairy business now. You certainly need electricity. Who else is here? Well, there's my friend Tom up there. Tom, them cows is looking mighty fat. Looking mighty fat. Pam, did you ever get that quilt done? Last time I saw you, you had it in a frame. Did you ever get it done? Not yet, not yet. How are you guys doing? I got your membership. Thank you very much. You talked him into it, didn't you? Very good, very good. Sir, you better get that hay off the ground. It's supposed to rain tomorrow. I just thought I'd point that out. Let me come on over here to the front of this old schoolhouse. These old bones are getting kind of tired right now, but I think I can make it. Let me get up here where, yes, sir. Well, thank you, sir. Where's that young man that introduced me? Thank you, sir. You know, that was a mighty fine introduction. But you know, when you ride an old hoss into town, you just naturally want to slick him up a little bit. And I believe that's what he did. Some of that was lies. Some of it was true. But folks, thank you all for turning out at this one-room schoolhouse tonight. And I'm here for one reason. I'm going to tell you guys that electricity is coming. That's right. You too can have electricity, just like the city folks in St. Louis, Cape Girardeau, Perryville, and St. Genevieve. Now I look around and I see the looks of disbelief on your faces. I know most of you have tried to get electricity before, and you were told you could not have it. I see my friend Clark in the audience. He lives over at Apple Creek. But when he approached the private power company, he was told he could not have electricity unless he paid $1,000 for the line construction. They also wanted him to pay $50 a month minimum and more for each outlet he had wired. Why, he figured it would cost him about $100 a month just to operate the equipment he wanted for his farm. Worse yet, after he paid that huge price, power company told him they would still own the line. That's kind of like buying a tractor and having the dealer keep the title. All of you can tell similar stories. You were told you couldn't have electricity because they couldn't make a profit from the few people who lived in rural areas. So now you ask, how are you going to make a profit by building lines in rural areas where so few people live. And I have an answer for you. We won't. That's right. Our president, Franklin Roosevelt, he has set up a program called the REA where the federal government will loan us all the money we need to do the job ourselves. We'll build those power lines you were told wouldn't come, and we'll bring electricity to your front door. And we'll do it for a fraction of what my friend was told. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, all it will cost you is $5. A thin $5 bill like the one I have here in my hand with President Harrison's picture on it. Instead of making a profit on you, we'll set up a cooperative. Everyone who receives power from this electric cooperative will be a member and an owner of the business. And you will elect representatives who will hold seats on the board and will operate the cooperative. Already, 30 electric cooperatives have been formed in Missouri, and several have already energized their first lines. Folks, times have been hard since the stock market crashed in 1929. We've been through some tough economic times, and we've weathered the most severe drought we've ever had in our history. But it's 1941 now, and the rain and prosperity has finally returned. It looks like there'll be a bumper crop this year when you start harvesting. And that means you should have enough cash to wire your homes and purchase a few appliances to make life a little bit easier. Electricity is the one thing you need to make your farm profitable once more. I see many ladies of the community in the audience. Ma'am, may I be so bold as to ask how old you are? What she said? She's 19 years old. My goodness, ain't Mary Young here. And already her hands are turning red and chapped from washing clothes on a wooden scrub board. Her back is beginning to stoop from the burden of carrying buckets of water into the house over and over again. Like so many ladies here today, you no doubt awoke this morning and fumbled for matches so you could light the lantern. You cleaned the ashes from the cook stove and carried them outside. And on the way back in, you fetched an armload of wood and built a fire so you could prepare breakfast. Then you hauled a bucket of water in that you pumped by hand from the cistern. You made breakfast with a lantern held high in one hand. Electricity can light your way. It can cook your meals with a reliable, flameless heat. And it can pump ample water for all of your chores. Ladies, once you have electricity, you will cast your sad irons into the pond and iron clothes the modern way with an electric iron. And you youngsters out there, many of you must clean the soot from lantern chimneys, trim the wicks, and keep them filled with fuel. Where's that young man I saw? There he is right there. I see you wear glasses. Could that be from the strain of trying to do your homework by the feeble light of a lantern? Just think how much easier that task would be with a bright electric light. And you, sir, I understand you're a dairyman. You told me you milked 5 head of cattle twice a day by hand. How would you like to increase the size of your herd 4 or more times and do less work? You can with an electric milker. Better yet, with electricity, you could have a grade A dairy. No more sour milk. Do we have any cattlemen in the room? Let's see a show of hands. We got any cattlemen in? I thought so. I thought we did. Do you know how much water you carried to your herd last year? Water that was laboriously pumped from the well? Of course you don't. You're too burdened by your back-breaking labors to track it. But I can tell you, for I have read the study done by one of my esteemed colleagues at the University of Missouri. The figure is 138 tons of water in 1 year. You will spend 775 hours per year pumping that water by hand, and if you value your time at only 50 cents an hour, you spent $386 on that task last year. So ladies, dig deep in your aprons for that egg money you carefully hoarded and sign up for electric service. Men, dig up those mason jars in the backyard and make your mark on the membership application. And ladies and gentlemen, I predict that future generations will look back with pride at what you did today to establish this member-owned, nonprofit rural electric cooperative. And brothers and sisters, I think you'll all agree with this statement. The greatest thing is to have the love of God in your heart, but the next greatest thing is to have electricity in your home. Okay guys, let me change hats now. So that, what I portrayed was what would have happened all over this area. Anywhere there was a one-room school or a church where people could gather together, and people who maybe were the original incorporators of the cooperative, they might have been the extension folks. Got a lot of help from extension, and they would have gathered people together who were interested in electricity and try to convince them to put down $5 membership fee and join the cooperative. And it was a hard sell. I'll talk some more about that later, but I want you guys to think a minute about your day, how it started out. And I'll just kind of go through my day, and I bet yours was just like it. I woke up to an alarm clock, electric alarm clock, got up and wandered over to the light switch, turned the lights on, went into the bathroom. The water in there came from an electric pump, deep underground. Then I staggered into the kitchen and filled up the coffee pot. I'm a coffee snob, so I had to use beans, so I had to grind the beans. I used electricity to grind those beans, brewed a pot of coffee, took a shower. The water was hot. It was heated by electricity. And when I left the house, I used electricity to open the garage door. Maybe some of you guys have an electric car, and you had that car plugged in overnight so you could get where you needed to go the next day. Even my lawnmower runs on electricity these days. Now I want you to just close your eyes for a minute and go back to about 1935, which was the year that President Roosevelt signed his executive order establishing REA. A year later, Congress made it official, put some money behind it. But go back to that time. Any time before that, you had no electricity for your alarm clock. When you got up, you had to find a book of matches and light that lantern. You had to find the lantern. And let's hope somebody put fuel in that, because how would you do that in the dark? And think about dark. You all don't know dark. They're just never dark anymore. There's always a light somewhere. There's night lights, there's security lights, there's different things, antennas that are with flashing lights. Back then, there was no light anywhere. So you fumbled, you got the matches out, hopefully you struck the right end of it. You got your lantern lit. Now you had to go to the bathroom. Guess where the bathroom was? Outside. Can I get an amen from an outhouse? Who's used an outhouse? I knew it. We had some. Where I grew up, we had an outhouse that we were considered very wealthy, because we had a two-seater. Yeah. We were tall cotton back then. But you went out and it was put down when you took the lantern with you. And guess what? A lot of families only had one lantern. So when somebody went out to the outhouse, the rest of them sat in the dark again. On your way back in, you picked up some kindling, you probably pumped some water, carried it in. I also had a pump where we lived. It was in a cistern. It went up and down. And the thing about that pump is you had to prime it. And if you used up all the water and you didn't have any water left, or it froze, that pump wasn't going to work. There was no electricity for any of those things I talked about. And we'll look at a few pictures here. Can I get this to work? I can. I almost said worked before. We only had electricity. Would somebody like to push the button for me? Can I get a volunteer? We'll go back, just hit the return key. Oh, now it's working, now it's working. Okay, never mind. I'm glad we fixed it. That electricity has to come all the way from Perryville. And so back in the early days when REA first started, 1935, 36, these posters would have gone up all over, anywhere people would have met, feed stores, churches, places like this, movie theaters. And it was a tease kind of for people. They kind of got their hopes up because they honestly had been told, and I've heard this story over and over again, the existing companies, they were not going to bring electricity to them. They just weren't going to do it. So people were looking for the light, and it appeared on the horizon in the form of the REA. And let me mention what REA was, because I bet there's people in this room, if I ask you where you got your electricity, you say, oh, I get it from the REA. A lot of older people still call it the REA, and a lot of their kids do too. But REA was a bank. It was a government-owned bank, and it loaned money. The idea was that existing utilities could get this money, very low interest, 2% interest, and they would extend these lines out in the rural areas. And when they did that for a year, they pitched it to places like Union Electric, Empire down in Southwest Missouri, Kansas City Power and Light, and there were no takers. Because, I mean, just figure, what is, you guys know Ameren, some of you might be an Ameren customers. What is Ameren in business to do?
Make money.
Make money for who? For the stockholders, right? And you would think that they are in business to sell electricity, but that's how they make money, by selling electricity. And how are you ever going to make a profit by running a line out into rural areas where there's maybe one person per mile of line or two people? And there's still places, I bet you, I don't know this for a fact, but I bet you the citizens folks will guarantee this for me. There are places now on their system that if there was no citizens, if there was no Black River Electric Cooperative, there would still be no power to those areas because you cannot possibly make a profit for it. And some of you live there. You're glad to have it, aren't you? So that's why they couldn't have it, and you can't blame them a bit because that's the American way. That's how capitalism works, and it's a darn good system. So this is what you did. If you couldn't get electricity, you might buy a Delco plant. And what a Delco plant was is a generator, ran on kerosene, I think, and it had a motor. The house I grew up in, you guys are going to think I'm older than I am, but we had one of these. The building was a stone building. It looked just like that. There was a concrete slab where the motor sat, and there was a hole in the wall where the exhaust pipe went out. And it basically charged those batteries, and there were 16 2-volt batteries. So you got 32 volts. Now, is anybody electrician here can tell me what a house today runs on? How many volts do you got? You got 120 and 240, right? So think, what could you do with 32 volts? You could run a radio, and you could have a few dim little lights. It wasn't very good, and it was expensive to operate. And these systems were very expensive, so you had to be very wealthy to have them. J.C. Penney, he was an electric co-op member in Northwest Missouri. He had one of those systems, but most of us couldn't afford them. Other people use wind chargers, little wind thing. Basically, all this did was charge a battery. I think it was 6 volts, and when you bought this, it was $15, and they gave you a radio, so you could listen to the Cardinals. And unfortunately, they only worked when the wind blew, and they put them up on their roof, and they were notorious for falling off, things like that. So not a good idea, really not a solution. So let's take a look at what life was like before electricity. Here's a woman filling up her lanterns. Must be pretty wealthy because she's got a lot of them. And you see those glass ones there. They're very pretty. We've got one we decorate with it, but never dream of using it. But that's fire in there, and that thing's made of glass. And if you had kids like me and my brother, and they ran around the house, we'd have had one of those, we would have burned the house down for sure. But somebody every day had to clean them. If you look at the one on the left, look at how dirty that lantern. And it put smoke rings on the ceiling. And you breathed that smoke too. It wasn't very good for you. And there's your stove. That's how you did all your cooking. And just think of that thing. It's cast iron and it gets hot, puts out a lot of heat. How would you like to use that on a day like today? And by the way, you don't have any air conditioning. You don't have a fan to run. And everybody that's ever cooked on one of those has told me they made the best biscuits. But no, you made the best biscuits. You ladies that cook on those, you were artists. Because you had to know the type of wood. You used softwood to get a real quick hot fire. Then you used oaks, like if you were making a roast or something like that. And the size of the wood varied, and there were dampers that you opened and closed. And it truly was an art. But in July, August in Missouri, not a good thing. And there's your washing machine. How many want to trade your washer in for that one? Now keep in mind that water had to be carried. There's a scrub board there, you're scrubbing that, and while you're at it, you're scrubbing your knuckles. You use lye soap, so that was rough on your hands and that sort of thing. All that water had to come from somewhere, and I know people who grew up without electricity. And one guy told me he walked 2 miles to a spring down in Ripley County to get water, and they carried it back. So you probably made the most of every drop of that water. When she got done, there were no dryers. You didn't have a dryer, so you used solar dryers, right? And not a bad thing. A lot of people today still do that. But what about in the wintertime? You know, you hang those clothes outside to dry, and when you brought them in, you'd have to break the ice off. Or you hung them all around the house, every space you could find. There it goes. Now there's your romantic dinner, family dinner there. Look at that picture. Look at how little light is coming out of there. You know, in the shadows and that sort of thing. This was not romantic. This was desperation times. And once again, you know, you had to buy the fuel for that. And when you ran out, nobody had any money back then. So, you know, just putting the fuel in that was a big drain on the finances. And there's this gal doing her homework, trying to do her homework. And there were studies done when the REA came along, and almost every area that they surveyed, the kids had trouble with their eyes. There were no eye doctors back then. You just couldn't see. Think of how much better that must have been when they got electricity. And then there's bath time. And in those times, you took a bath once a week. Usually on Saturdays, so you get polished up a little bit to go into town. And you got a tub full of water, you started with the oldest, and you went down to the youngest. It was the same water. And that's where the saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. By the time this guy got done with it, you could definitely lose a baby in it. And by the way, this is an actual director. I know who this is. He's from Quiver River Electric Cooperative. He posted this picture, and we'd like to redo it. So I'm looking for a volunteer from the city. Maybe one of their staff or directors would like that, so we could remake that photo. Okay. So there's the light. The day the lights came on was such a big deal for people. They still talk about that today. There are so many people that remember that. And I have to tell you, it was a big, big deal for people to finally get electricity. And this is kind of how it went. When the lights came on, they'd go in there, and you see that pole chain. So you had one light hanging down in the center of the room. And the man of the house, on the day the lights came on, he'd go up, and he'd pull that string, and the lights would come on, and everybody go, ooh, look at that, that's great, except for the housewife. And she'd go, turn it off, and don't turn it back on until I sweep that floor. Because no one had ever seen the inside of their house. They had these dim little lanterns that all they did was put shine. So she would sweep the floor, get everything, and then they could turn the light on. And then what happened is the man of the house would go back, he'd turn the light on, everybody'd look at it, and then he'd say, hey, someone else come over here and hold this string so I can look. They didn't know a lot about electricity. And there were a few other stories. When they tried to explain to people how electricity was going to work, they used water because that made a lot of sense. The pipe was a lot like the wires, so the electricity went down the pipe. And resistance, that's when the pipe was too small, when they're met with resistance, and voltage was how much the pump pushed in there and that kind of thing. And they did such a good job of explaining that using water that people thought if they didn't have something plugged into every outlet, the electricity would leak out. So they went around plugging things in just to make sure it didn't leak out. And one other story I'll tell you about the day the lights came on, this happened over in Kentucky, because Missouri people are much smarter than Kentucky people. This town got electricity finally, and everybody turned their lights on. Well, at the same time, they had a flu outbreak, and everybody got sick. So the men of the community went around, they gathered up all the appliances, they dug a big hole in the ground and buried them. And the flu didn't go away, so they figured out, well, maybe it wasn't the electricity, they dug them all back up. So that's kind of how that went. Okay, there's President Roosevelt. He is signing his executive order. And REA was part of a New Deal program. It had lots of lettered programs and things like that that he put into place to try to get people out of the Depression, kind of raise their standard of living and that sort of thing. So he was kind of a hero. And the reason he did that, he had a little place down in Georgia, Warm Springs, Georgia, and he didn't have electricity there. He stayed there and he saw what a burden it was. So he was determined to try to do something and help them out. So I mentioned that, you know, at first they tried to get existing utilities to borrow this money and extend lines out to the, very few of them actually did it. One of them that did, though, was Missouri General Utilities. We'll talk a little bit more about them, but Missouri General served small towns all across the Ozarks, and also here. They served in St. Mary, Perryville, St. Genevieve, a lot of the little communities. I tell you the other ones, but I can't pronounce most of them. But they were a company that was owned by another much larger company, out-of-state company, that had these little utilities all over the place, even in Canada. It wasn't managed very well. They were too far away. They couldn't keep their eyes on them, and that sort of thing. So about the time we were talking about organizing Citizens Electric, they were in bankruptcy. In fact, the government ordered them to be sold. So we'll talk a little bit more about them. But there's an actual picture. Some of the trucks. I think Tom, doesn't Black River still have trucks like that?
Yeah.
I think they do, one of them. But, so here's a little news clipping I found. I didn't think anybody in Missouri actually took loans out, but this says that Missouri General Utilities were authorized to apply for an REA loan. So they had to go to the Public Service Commission in Jefferson City and ask them if they could apply for a loan. And if you read all that, it's probably hard to read, but down at the bottom, it says it wanted to extend service to Oak Ridge, Pocahontas, and Whitewater, Metro, Lithium, and Belgique in Perry County, Glen Allen and Bollinger County, and several other points in Stoddard and St. Genevieve County. They were not extending it to the farm. They were going to population centers, places where they could make a profit. And I never could find anything that said they actually did this. But at least their costs were in the right place. So September 6, 1941, you all need to have a big birthday party that day, because that was the birthday of Genevieve Electric, 1941. And it was right here in St. Genevieve where the first meeting to organize the co-op was. So wouldn't it be cool if that was at the Oris Theater? I don't know where it was. I think it may have been at the Farm Bureau office, because their secretary was there taking notes. I have to do a little more research on it. But Theo Karen of St. Genevieve was elected president. Frank Mankin of Perry County was elected secretary. Big day to get the co-op organized. We're going to have electricity here. Now remember that date, September 6, 1941. What happened in 1941, December 1941? You remember December 7, 1941? Pearl Harbor. Right, so they picked a bad year to get started, didn't they? Yeah. And actually, when they got that co-op going, it was going to be huge. In fact, it was the biggest REA loan application ever from the state of Missouri. So they had big plans going. But what happened is once the war started, and even before the war, we knew war was coming before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So we were gearing up, we were building planes, we were building battleships, building tanks, and all that wire and even the poles and hardware that should have gone into the electric co-op were going instead to the war effort. So as I said, kind of a bad time to get started. And it was hard. It was just because you organized the co-op didn't mean anybody was going to get electricity anytime soon. And I love this quote. This is from an extension agent that helped get Consolidated Electric started. It said, some folks, rural electrification has been taken for granted. Like presto, it just happened. It's always been here. To get rural electrification was not easy. It was a battle, a hard fight with a short stick. So we'll talk a little bit about that, how hard a job it was. So once you got the co-op organized, they filed their corporation papers, you had to go around and get members to actually sign up. And that $5, how much, do you all know how much $5 would be today? $250.
Wow.
So now if I came in here and I said, you might get electricity sometime, I don't know when, but I need you to give me $250. How many of you all would do that? Anybody that crazy would actually do it? And then again, nobody had $5. I talked to a lady recently who remembers the day the lights came on. She's 94 years old, and she worked at a little store up in Macon County. And she told me that people would come in and they would bring eggs to sell and cream, or they bring milk in, and she would test the milk to see how much cream was in it, and that would determine how much it was worth. And then they would add up the eggs she brought in, they put a price to those, and on the top of the ticket, they would write how much money they had coming, what their credit was. And then the people wouldn't pick up a single thing until they knew how much they had in credit. And then they would walk around and they would spend not a penny more than what was written on the top of that, because they had no money. Nobody had any money back then. So these guys that went around taking up memberships, they would take chickens, they'd take eggs, sometimes they reach in their pocket and paid the $5 for them. And also, it wasn't men doing this. Who had the most to gain from getting electricity? The women, right? The ladies of the community. So look at these guys. If the gal on the right there, if she knocked on my door and said, I want your $5, by golly, I'll give her $5. She was tough. And they are looking at the map. This is an actual photo from the REA days. They're looking at the map and they're deciding which roads they're going to go down and get that membership fee. And I love this photo. So here's a woman on the right. She's trying to get $5 from this farmer in his big overalls, just like I've got on. And he ain't buying it, is he? He's not. He's telling her, I haven't got any money, you know, blah, blah, blah. Now look behind him. Look at his wife. Oh, God, will this man just shut up and figure out $5? And this is an actual story that this is the way it would go when they come out there. And the wife would say, husband, we need electricity. And he said, we ain't getting it. And she'd say, but we need it. We really need it. And he'd say, we ain't got enough money. And she'd say, well, I'm not going to cook. I'm not going to clean. I'm not going to do anything. He'd say, you're not going to do anything? And she'd say, no. And he'd say, where do I sign? And that's how they got it done. So here's your original board of directors for Genevieve Electric Cooperative. I don't know who all those guys are. I wish I did. But these guys got the co-op off the ground. They succeeded in doing it. It's a big group. These are probably incorporators. So what you incorporated, you got you elected a board, and the board would be much smaller. Today it's 10 members. And they based the office in St. Genevieve. I understand there were 2 offices here, and I'm going to have to go see the original one because it's still standing somewhere down by the railroad track. And this is a map about the same time that Genevieve Electric Cooperative was organized. This was progress in rural electrification at that time. So the darker areas are places that have energized lines. Shaded areas are underway. Where it's white, nothing's happened yet. You can see where I live in Franklin County, nothing's happened. The dark spots over here that you can see, those are Missouri General Utilities. So they're, there's electricity there already, but look at all the white areas at St. Francis County, nothing's happening there. You go down south, not a whole lot there. Other places are doing pretty good. Look at the Boot Heel, they're doing really well. So finally, 1937, the very first REA finance line in Missouri was energized. And that happened up in the northeast corner of the state at Lewis County. And this is the couple that were the very first people to get electricity. And what talk about a big deal. Those guys were just in their glory. He was the board president of the cooperative, probably worked harder than anybody did to get electricity on. And it was in July, so it would be 90 years this July when those lights were turned on. And it was in the middle of the day, about 11 o'clock, and he said even though it was the middle of the day, those lights looked mighty bright. And I want to show you, this is a group that gathered for that. There's also, you see the guy on the left, kind of got a uniform on, it looks like? That's the world's first photo bomber. He was actually there to deliver ice, and he jumped in the picture. But again, it was a big deal, and Mr. Anderson, his son actually served on their board, and he was a little guy, and his dad took him around and actually had him collecting memberships. And he said it was very tough. He said most of the people thought he was crazy for even, trying to dream that they would have electricity. And he said not only that sometimes he thought his dad was crazy too. He didn't think it would ever happen, but it did. And of course, it wasn't enough for electric cooperatives just to string lines, right? You had to get your house wired. And, I mentioned hardly anybody had $5 to pay the membership fee. How in the world would you pay to get your house wired? Because you're talking about existing things. If anybody's ever wired a house, you have to cut into the walls, you have to cut into the floors, you have to cut the roof and put in the meters and all that kind of thing. So here's a woman, her name is Grace Durr, and she lived in between Cuba and St. James, and Grace wanted her house wired. So she wrote this nice little note to Crawford Electric Cooperative, and she said, if you'll take my broodmare in on trade, I'll sign up for membership and I'll get my house wired. So she wanted to trade her broodmare, and I don't know if you can read that, but she says, I'll have it put in, Brown will pay the $275 per year, that was her minimum. She says, now bring up the papers and I'll sign up for it, and I've never signed up. I'm not able to have it put in unless you will take the mare. She's a good broodmare, a little wild now, but she's plowed many gardens in St. James. And I never did see whether they took her up on that, but I'm willing to bet that somebody went out and wired her house for her. And the way they got that done, the way they got houses wired, they actually loaned money through REA. So you could borrow money to have your house wired. You could also borrow money to get a few appliances because you also needed that. And then they would add that to your monthly bill. And by the way, how much do you think a monthly bill was in those early days? About $2.50. And that was the minimum. Some of them were even cheaper than that. Well, there's great. So here's the project. When it kicked off, the largest project in the state of Missouri. I did not know that until I found this up there. Their A section, which would have been the first one, it said it was planned to serve 1,180 farmers. I've done books on about 15 of the electric co-ops in Missouri. I'd never seen a line that served that many people. Most of them were 180 people, maybe 200, maybe 300. It was going to be 603 miles of line. Imagine that. And not only were there that many people, there was another 600 or so that hadn't signed up yet. So this was going to be a huge cooperative. And then, as I mentioned, World War II came along. By 1942, nothing had been done. The lines hadn't been built, and people were, where's my $5? I want my $5 back. The papers were really good to the co-op. They really published a lot of stories about it. This one said that the project is in grade A shape, and the only thing holding up is a shortage of copper. So people had just had to wait. They didn't wait very well. They didn't really want to. But then something really interesting came along, quite a development that would forever alter the path the cooperative would take in the future. As I mentioned, Missouri General Utilities came up for sale, and Genevieve Electric wanted it. So when it sold, Show Me Power is a transmission cooperative that serves most of the Ozarks. Show Me bought a big chunk of Missouri General Utilities, and 5 other electric cooperatives also bought pieces of it. One of them was Genevieve Electric. So they bought the entire system this side of the state, which is a great thing. Now, why would they want that? Why do you think they would want us? They just barely getting started. They haven't built any lines yet. And they spent almost $1 million to purchase this. I think it was $990-something thousand. It gave them one thing that all the electric cooperatives in the state were missing, and that's density. So I mentioned that 1 person per mile of line, 3 people per mile of line. This instantly gave them, it doubled the size of the co-op member-wise. It gave them density, and that made everybody's bill cheaper. So pretty cool. And even Perryville's mayor, he was on board. Said it might be best for Perryville to join with a cooperative, at least for the present. Later he'll change his tune. We'll talk about that a little bit here. So finally, April of 1945, the war's coming to an end. Materials are available. So they've scaled things back a bit. It's going to be 828 miles total. This first section of line is going to be 165 miles. Most of that in Perry County, only 30 miles in St. Genevieve County, and it was going to serve 285 homes, much smaller. June 18, 1945, the day the lights came on, not quite the day, but the day they set the first pole, set on the Ben Buckeye Farm, south of Longtown. Anybody know where that is? Probably still in that family, maybe. And it was pretty amazing. There was a demonstration project there. I find this really hard to believe, but it was in the newspaper, so I know it's true. They had a machine there that set that first pole in 5 minutes. Dug the hole and put the pole in the hole in 5 minutes. Then could we set a pole in 5 minutes today? I want to see that machine. I bet it was something else. But big day for this area. And then finally, August 30th, 1945, about the same time, the Public Service Commission approved the sale of Missouri General Utilities to the co-op. So there we are. There's one of their trucks. There's their office there. And so finally, they knew they probably knew they were going to get it. But before this happened, it wasn't a done deal. There was a survey taken in this area, and overwhelmingly everybody wanted the co-op to take this over, even in the cities and everything. When citizens took over Missouri General Utilities, they kept all the employees on. Everybody got to keep their jobs. They kept all the materials. We got an awful lot of good things out of it. So the first thing they did, guess what they did? They lowered rates for everybody. They did it twice, and they were significant reductions in the neighborhood of 10%. And that's where that density comes into play, because now they had so many more members from St. Genevieve, St. Mary, Perryville, that everybody got a rate decrease, which is kind of a cool thing. But guess what happened in Perryville? So I don't know if there's any city employees here, and I don't want to offend you or anything, but there are a lot of things that cities do for their residents. They supply water, they supply sewage, they have a street department, feeds the streets. The only thing that makes money for a city is electricity sales. So if they have a municipal, the municipal is covering the costs for all the other services that they provide. And Perryville's mayor, being a good mayor and looking out for his town, he thought maybe they ought to get in the electricity business. So what he planned to do was float a bond issue, raise a bunch of money, and build duplicate lines in Perryville, and start selling to the citizens of Perryville. And of course, that didn't sit very well with the co-op, because they just spent almost $1 million buying those lines. So what happened is there was a war of words laid out in the newspapers. Here's one here. The mayor came out and he said the co-op was operating illegally in Perryville. And guess what? They were, but not really. So what happened when they bought those towns, and there were 3 of them that were more than 1,500 population. An electric cooperative in Missouri cannot serve in a town of that size. So something had to change, and what happened is they had to reorganize as a corporation. corporation. And it was underway, as this article explains, as soon as they bought it, they knew they were going to have to do this. But the Public Service Commission moved very slow, so it hadn't been done yet. So they explained to the people that, yes, we are operating legally, these changes that we have to do are in progress. So here we go, May 12, 1948, banner day of the cooperative. It became Citizens Electric Corporation, not cooperative anymore, corporation. So they were organized, instead of under the chapter that the other electric cooperatives were, they were organized just as a general business. And you can see the sign in the background, it's got the new name on it, the trucks have got the new name. So that big day for Citizens Electric Corporation today. We'll talk some more about that. When it started, a lot of good things came to this area. And here's a few of them that they pointed out. I think this was in 1952. They actually needed to raise rates again because inflation had gone up. It was going up so drastically that nobody had foreseen this. So they needed a little rate increase. It wasn't going to put them back to where they were before they lowered rates, but they wanted to point out the benefits that they brought to the area. So everyone had electricity now that wanted it. They call that area coverage. Anybody that wanted electricity could get it. They added $3 million to the taxable wealth of the communities in this area. They had $2 million in payroll. They created a $5 million market for electrical appliances and equipment. You think the people selling appliances in St. Genevieve like the co-op? Pretty sure they did. And guess what? This rate increase came in 1952. There wasn't another rate increase for Citizens Electric members for 20 years. 1972 was the next time they raised rates. Anybody know what happened in 1972 that made them raise rates? It wasn't their fault. It's something that Union Electric did. They started building the Callaway nuclear power plant. And of course the co-op bought that too. But 20 years, that's impressive. So that brings us to Citizens Electric today. Look at all those bright smiling faces there. They're all embarrassed because they wore the same shirt that day.
We were told to. I had a cow costume.
Okay. So it's close to 85 years. I mentioned in September it will be 85 years since Genevieve Electric was launched. Let's look at Citizens today. It's one of the strongest co-ops in Missouri. It has 27,000 connected meters. Man, think about those early days when they thought 1,100 was a lot. Nearly 3,000 miles of energized line and a strong 10.8 members per mile of line. That's the envy. We have co-ops in Missouri that still have 3 members per mile of line. There are 82 employees, and it pays more than $4 million in taxes. So think of the benefits for your schools and things like that. In spite the name, the corp at the end of it, Citizen is a corporation that acts like a co-op. And I'll show you just a few things they do. Capital credits, and I got all this off your website, I hope this is accurate. $2.25 million in capital credits retired in 2024. And that's that nonprofit thing. You might ask, what happens if they make a profit? They give it back to the customers. What a dumb business model. If you went to a bank and said, I'm going to borrow some money, and here's my business plan, and what are you going to do with your profit? I'm going to give it back to them. They laugh you out of there. But what a great thing for customers of a utility to get that money back. $50 million returned to members since 1993. $8,000 in scholarships awarded to high school seniors. I wish I could have got one of those when I went to college. 4,500 invested in youth leadership events. That's like the youth tour, where they send kids to Washington, D.C., and that's going to kick off next week, by the way. $203,413 in rebates issued to members. Here's another dumb thing that cooperatives do. Name one other business that will pay you and show you how to use less of their product. Like, could you go down to the gas station and say, my car is using too much gas. Can you come out here and show me how to use less of your product? They'll come out, well, put some new spark plugs in and change your air filter. But cooperatives care. And they want you to have all the electricity that you need, but they don't want you to overuse it. And they want you to waste it, because guess what? They have an electric bill too. So if they keep their electric bill down, they can keep yours down too. So it actually is a good idea. And here's a little something I pulled off there too. I don't know if you call this a mission statement. When you sign up for electricity with Citizens Electric, you don't just become a customer. You become a member who has a very important say in how the corporation is run and how it serves you and the community. You elect the leadership. Together, members chart the progress of the corporation, each one playing an active role in improving and adapting the services we provide. And just to boil this down to exactly what this means is you elect the people that make the decisions. You have people who are members of the cooperative who decide the rates you pay. And guess what? They have to pay the same rates. So how likely are they going to be to raise rates? Not very. And I've actually sat in on some board meetings with boards who were discussing, a rate increase. And it goes kind of like this. You know the price of hogs is down right now. And that factory up the road, they laid off the third shift. Guys, can we wait? Can we give them maybe 6 more months? And the manager says, yeah, we'll pinch your pockets a little bit, and eventually they have to do it. But they know the community, they live here in the community. They're not like an investor-owned utility where you don't have to use the services, you don't have to live in the area where it comes from. So pretty good deal, really. And I had to throw this in. I clipped this out a long time ago. This is an article from Forbes magazine. And if you're into economic development, if you're a city planner or a mayor or anything like that, you've been hearing for years, we cannot compete with China, India, and other developing countries for manufacturing jobs, except in Perryville. In Perryville, they're bucking the trend. And look what they call it. A small town in Missouri became a manufacturing oasis. And the article went on, I don't have all of it here, but it talked about all of the manufacturing that's going on in Perryville. And I can tell you this, I'm not an economic developer, but I did play one on TV once. The first thing a business, an industry is going to ask for when they decide where to move is do we have affordable and reliable electricity? And guarantee they've got it here, these companies wouldn't be located there. So really good thing there. And just a little bit about the co-op difference. Co-ops are great things, whether it's electric co-op, a farm co-op, a milk co-op. If they're nonprofit, they exist one thing only, and that's to provide a service. The members own it. You get your electricity from citizens, you go around and brag that you own a big company. Members elect their representatives. Members have a say in how it operates. Those who set the rates pay the rates, just for one reason, service. And the middle name of cooperatives is community. They're one of the cooperative principles they operate under is committed to the community, and they always give back. So now what I want to leave you guys with here tonight, let's say there was never a Genevieve Electric, there was never a Citizens, there was never that purchase, lines hadn't been built. You guys don't have electricity now. I should turn the lights off while I ask you. Could you do it again? Could you do what those guys did? Would you have the courage to go out there and knock on doors, collect that money? Would you take the chance? When they applied for these loans, maybe a $800,000 loan. And think about these farmers. Think about your grandparents. Who always said, "Don't borrow." What's it say in the Bible? Neither a lender nor a borrower be. And they said, guys, their hands shook so bad they couldn't sign those loan papers, and somebody had to hold their arm still so they could sign it. Could you do it again? What do y'all think? What do you think? You don't know? Of course you could. You would do it in a heartbeat, because I know rural people. And whenever the chips are down, I was here in St. Genevieve in 1993 covering the big flood. Y'all remember that? Neighbors turned out, helped neighbors. When that water went down, they went in and helped clean it. They did things to fix, make it better, to improve it. You've got levees now. You stepped up. That's happened. You had a big tornado with Perryville a few years ago. Same thing happened. People took people into their homes. They went out, got their chainsaw, and went out and cut trees and things folks, if this hadn't happened, we had to do it again today, I know you'd do it. 2009, the big ice storm, every line in the boot hill was laying on the ground. Rural people came down, they put those lines back up. Took 50 years to build them, they had them back up in a month. So I know you can do it, and hats off to all those people, those, I call them pioneers of power that made this happen. Because now anybody that wants electricity can have it. They raised the quality of life and made this a much better country. And I'm going to close with this. Now that we have REA, Dad, those lights don't look so bright, do they? That was the city, they were losing them to the cities. I want to thank you guys for letting me come here and speak. I'm a big fan of the museum. I got to do a story on that when it first opened. Love this town and love the people here. My friends at Citizens Electric, thanks for hosting this. You guys are a great bunch of people. And just want to tell you guys, stay close to your co-op. Don't ever let it get away from you because it's a good thing. That's all I got for you.
Thank you, Jim.